Beyond the Gate spoilers tease that Naomi and Jacob disrupt the fragile peace that had just begun to settle between Martin and Smitty. For weeks, tension had hung between the two men like a storm cloud refusing to move on. Words had been exchanged that cut deeper than either had expected, and though both had their reasons, the bitterness had taken root. But now, on this overcast afternoon, in the small living room of Smitty's home, something shifted. It began with the sound of Martin's hesitant knock on the door. Not a confident rap, not a demand to be let in, just a quiet request, almost an apology in itself. Smitty opened the door, his face guarded, but his eyes softened as he saw the man standing before him. Martin looked tired, older somehow than the last time they spoke. The lines on his face weren't just from age but from guilt and from carrying burdens too long alone. There was no dramatic speech, no grand gesture, only Smitty's steady voice. "It's been too long, Martin. Come on in." Those words, simple as they were, felt like the release of a breath neither had realized they'd been holding. And in that moment, forgiveness flowed between them without being named. Martin was welcome again, not just in Smitty's home, but in his life. Tyrell and Samantha were there to witness it, their own faces lighting up in shared relief. They had been quietly hoping for this reconciliation, knowing how much the feud had weighed on everyone. With the tension broken, Samantha grinned and suggested they all sit down for a game of cards. Tyrell, ever the enthusiast for friendly competition, jumped at the idea. The table was soon set with a deck of worn cards, a small stack of poker chips, and mugs of coffee. Laughter began to replace the silence that had so often filled the space before. Martin leaned back in his chair, his voice lighter now, telling a story from years ago that had Tyrell nearly choking on his drink. Even Smitty, whose laughter had been rare in recent times, let out a deep chuckle. The room felt warmer not just from the coffee or the overhead light, but from something far more fragile and precious, the sense that wounds could truly heal. But peace has a way of drawing out the shadows, as if they can't bear to be forgotten. Just as the laughter reached its peak, Naomi and Jacob exchanged a glance that signaled they could no longer keep their news to themselves. Naomi's tone was careful at first, almost hesitant, but her words cut through the warmth like a shard of glass. "We found her," she said simply. Samantha blinked. "Found who?" "Your mother," Jacob added, his voice low but certain. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Tyrell's cards slipped from his hands onto the table. Samantha's smile vanished as her gaze darted between Naomi and Jacob, searching their faces for some sign that this was a misunderstanding, a joke, anything but the truth it seemed to be. Naomi continued, her voice soft but firm, describing the woman they had met, how she had the same eyes as Tyrell, the same shape of face as Samantha. How she had been searching for them for years, but never had the right leads. Naomi's words hinted at a name, June. She didn't say it outright at first, as though holding it back could delay the inevitable shift in the room. But once the name was spoken, it felt final, irreversible. The air grew heavier. Tyrell leaned back, rubbing his jaw as if the weight of this revelation was pressing on him physically. Samantha stared at the table, her thoughts clearly racing. They had both grown up without knowing this woman, without even daring to imagine what she might be like. Their family had been built from scraps of trust and loyalty with those around them, people like Smitty and Martin, and now they were being told there was someone else, someone who was supposed to have been there from the beginning. "So what happens now?" Samantha finally asked. Jacob's reply was cautious. "She wants to see you. She wants you to live with her." The words hung in the air like smoke, impossible to wave away. A part of Tyrell was curious, hungry for answers about the years they had lost, the childhood they could have had. But another part of him recoiled at the thought of leaving the life he knew, the people who had stood by him. For Samantha, the thought of leaving was equally complicated. Every wall she had built around her trust was trembling, unsure whether to fall or fortify. Martin, sensing the tension spiraling, reached for his coffee, though his eyes never left Tyrell and Samantha. He knew that kind of crossroad, the one where every choice changes who you are. The card game was abandoned. The four of them sat in a half-circle of silence, the earlier laughter now a distant echo. Naomi's hand rested lightly on Jacob's knee, as if steadying herself for the storm she might have just unleashed. While that storm gathered in one corner of the city, another was brewing elsewhere. Leslie's apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of old floorboards. She had been sorting through a box of photographs when the knock came. It wasn't urgent, more of a polite tap-tap-tap, but it startled her all the same. Leslie was not in the habit of receiving visitors without warning. When she opened the door, she froze. Standing there was a woman well into her 60s, her frame slight, her posture a little stooped as though weighed down by years of unspoken truths. Her face was pale and drawn, the skin around her eyes marked by sleepless nights. And yet there was something familiar in her expression. Leslie's breath caught, her eyes glistening before she could stop them. The world seemed to narrow until it was just the two of them, the hallway fading into nothing. "You," Leslie's voice broke, the single syllable almost too heavy to speak. The woman gave a small, tired smile, one that hinted at both relief and sorrow. Without fully understanding why, Leslie felt tears slipping down her cheeks. The sight of this woman, her fragility, the quiet strength beneath it, something deep inside her. Memories that had no clear shape stirred in her mind, moments she thought she'd forgotten or maybe had only imagined. Was this her mother? The thought flashed through her like lightning, quick and dangerous. She had long ago stopped searching for that answer, stopped letting herself hope. The woman stepped forward slightly, her voice a whisper. "Leslie, we need to talk." Inviting her in felt like inviting in a storm, but Leslie stepped aside anyway. The woman moved slowly, her eyes scanning the apartment as though cataloging the life Leslie had built. They sat at the small kitchen table, a pot of tea between them, steam curling in the quiet air. But the silence wasn't empty, it was taut, electric with the weight of what hadn't been said yet. The woman's hands were trembling slightly as she reached into her bag. She pulled out a small, weathered envelope, its corners worn and edges slightly torn. She slid it across the table without explanation. Leslie stared at it, her fingers hovering above it but not touching. The possibilities swirled in her mind. Was it a letter from years ago, something meant for her but never delivered? Was it proof of something that could explain why this woman had appeared now, looking as though she carried decades of regret? Some part of Leslie wondered if this wasn't her mother at all, but someone connected in a different way. Could she be the mother of her late husband? The idea sent a ripple of unease through her. If that was the case, what message could be so urgent it couldn't be left unsaid? The woman's eyes softened, but her voice stayed measured. "There are things you don't know. Things you were never told." Leslie's heart pounded. She wanted answers, but feared them just as much. There was a sense, small but unshakable, that whatever truth was about to be revealed would change not just her understanding of the past, but the shape of her future. The tea between them cooled, untouched. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the turning point unfolding in this small kitchen. Inside, the tension was a living thing, coiled and waiting. And somewhere, back in that other living room where Naomi and Jacob's revelation still lingered like a ghost, Tyrell and Samantha were each wrestling with a decision that could tear their world apart. Tyrell sat by the window long after the others had left, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. The city outside felt impossibly distant, a world continuing its rhythm while his own balance was shifting under his feet. Samantha paced behind him, her arms folded tight across her chest. Every few steps, she would glance toward the door, as if expecting someone to burst in and tell them this had all been a mistake. But no one came. Naomi's words had taken root, growing into questions they weren't ready to face. Tyrell replayed the conversation over and over, searching for any sign that it had been exaggerated, that perhaps June wasn't really who they thought. Samantha's voice finally cut through the quiet. "If we go, what happens to everything here? What happens to us?" The unspoken fear hung between them. What if meeting June meant leaving more than just a place? Across the city, Jacob and Naomi walked side by side, their own expressions weighed with the consequences of what they'd revealed. They had set something in motion that couldn't be undone. Naomi's gaze was fixed ahead, but Jacob kept glancing back, as though expecting the air itself to carry the echoes of Tyrell and Samantha's silence. Meanwhile, Leslie sat alone at her kitchen table, the envelope untouched. The woman who had brought it now stood by the window, her hands clasped tightly as though holding herself together. The light from the street lamps traced the lines in her face, revealing the years she carried. Leslie finally broke the silence. "If you came all this way, you might as well tell me what's inside." The woman hesitated, her eyes meeting Leslie's before looking away. "It's not something I can just say. You have to read it." When Leslie slid her finger under the flap and pulled out the folded paper, the first thing she noticed was the handwriting uneven, rushed, and yet unmistakably personal. Her eyes scanned the lines, the words unraveling a story she hadn't known she was part of. Names she recognized mixed with events she'd never heard about, a chain of choices leading to the present moment. By the time she reached the end, her hands were trembling. The woman at the window hadn't moved, but Leslie felt her presence pressing in, as if bracing for the reaction. "Why now?" Leslie asked, her voice rough. "Why tell me after all this time?" The woman turned slowly. "Because there's no more time left to wait. People are looking for answers, and you're in the middle of it, whether you know it or not." Back in Smitty's home, Martin lingered after everyone else had gone. He could feel the unease still radiating from the earlier conversation. Tyrell and Samantha hadn't made a decision yet, but the idea of them leaving had already created a space in the room, space shaped like absence. Smitty kept shuffling the deck of cards in his hands, the sound sharp in the quiet. "If they go," he said finally, "things won't be the same here." Martin nodded, knowing too well how fragile bonds could be. Naomi, in another corner of the city, sat with Jacob in a dim cafe. Her fingers tapped against her mug as she stared at the steam rising from it. "You think they'll go?" she asked. Jacob shrugged. "I think they're curious. And curiosity's a hard thing to fight once it starts." The truth was, Naomi had more to say about June details she'd left out when speaking to Tyrell and Samantha. There were pieces of the story that could sway them either way, but she wasn't sure if revealing them would help or destroy what trust they still had. Leslie, still at her kitchen table, folded the letter back into the envelope. She didn't offer it back to the woman. "I'll keep this," she said, her tone steady now. The woman gave a faint nod, as though she'd expected nothing else. But before she left, she placed a small key on the table. "When you're ready," she said, "this will take you to the rest of the truth." And with that, she was gone, the sound of her footsteps fading into the night. Alone, Leslie stared at the key. She didn't know what door it belonged to, but she had the sinking feeling that finding it would mean unraveling far more than she was prepared for. Tyrell, lying awake that night, found his thoughts circling back to one image, a woman named June, standing in a doorway, holding out her hands as if she had always been waiting for him. But in his mind, her face kept changing, sometimes warm and welcoming, sometimes shadowed with something unspoken. Samantha, across the hall, felt the same uncertainty gnawing at her. She wanted answers, but she also knew that once they stepped toward them, there would be no way back to the life they knew now. Jacob's phone buzzed in the middle of the night. The message was brief: "She's ready to meet them." He didn't reply right away, staring at the screen until the words blurred. In another part of the city, Leslie placed the key and the envelope in a drawer, locking it as if the physical barrier could hold back the changes already in motion. But deep down, she knew it wouldn't stay there forever. The days that followed carried a strange stillness, as though everyone was waiting for a signal to move. Conversations were shorter, glances heavier. Smitty noticed it most in Tyrell, who seemed half-present even during the simplest exchanges. Samantha kept busy, but every so often, her eyes would drift toward the horizon, as if she could already see June waiting there. Naomi avoided pushing them, though the tension of holding back the rest of the truth was starting to show. Jacob kept his own counsel, but his watchfulness suggested he knew more than he was saying. And Leslie found herself walking streets she hadn't visited in years, searching for something she couldn't quite name. Each time she passed an unfamiliar door, she wondered if the key in her drawer belonged there. Each time she saw a stranger's face, she wondered if they recognized her for reasons she didn't yet understand. As the city moved toward whatever was coming next, it seemed that all of them, Tyrell, Samantha, Naomi, Jacob, and Leslie, were standing on the edge of something vast and unseen. And though none of them could say for certain what waited beyond that threshold, they all knew the same truth. Once they stepped forward, nothing in their lives would ever be the same again. The morning the decision came, the city was washed in the pale blue of early light. Tyrell stood on the corner outside Smitty's house, hands buried deep in his jacket pockets, watching the slow stream of traffic. Samantha joined him a moment later, her hair pulled back, her expression calm but tight. They didn't need to speak. The night's silence had already carried their answer to both of them. Inside, Smitty and Martin sat at the kitchen table, both pretending to drink their coffee while listening for the sound of footsteps. When Tyrell and Samantha finally came in, the air shifted. Samantha took the seat across from Martin, folding her hands together. "We're going to meet her," she said simply. Smitty's jaw flexed. "And after that?" Tyrell shook his head. "We'll see." Naomi and Jacob arrived not long after, the air between all six of them humming with the weight of unspoken things. Naomi's relief was visible, but she didn't let herself smile. Instead, she gave them the time and place, a quiet park on the edge of the city, just after noon. While they waited for that hour to come, Leslie was walking the opposite direction, the key in her pocket pressing against her palm with every step. She had made her choice too. The address had been written in small, neat letters on the back of the envelope, and now she found herself standing before an unremarkable building with a weathered blue door. The lock clicked open easily, as though it had been waiting for her alone. Inside was a narrow hallway leading to a single room. Dust hung in the air, and on the far table lay a small box. Leslie opened it to find photographs, dozens of them, some of her, some of a man she recognized instantly as her late husband, and some of people she didn't know at all. Tucked beneath them was another letter, this one unsigned. The message was brief: "You're part of this whether you choose to be or not." At the park, Tyrell and Samantha approached the bench where June sat waiting. She rose when she saw them, her eyes filling with tears before a word was spoken. The three stood there for a long moment, measuring each other not by what they saw, but by what they felt: the pull of blood and time, the ache of years lost. June spoke first, her voice trembling. "I thought I'd never find you." They sat, and the hours that followed unfolded slowly, cautiously. June told them about the years apart, the choices that had led her away, the countless failed attempts to track them down. She admitted mistakes without excuse, and when her voice broke, she didn't try to hide it. Samantha asked the hardest question. "Why no?" June looked at her hands. "Because I don't have forever. And because the people around you now, they're part of this too, whether they realize it or not." Her words struck something deeper than either Tyrell or Samantha had expected. In the space of that conversation, they realized the truth was bigger than just the three of them. It reached out like roots through everything they knew, connecting to people they hadn't thought could be linked. As dusk fell, they didn't make promises, but they didn't turn away either. The meeting ended not with a final answer, but with an unspoken agreement. There would be another meeting, another step towards something still undefined. Elsewhere, Leslie locked the blue door behind her, the photographs still in her bag. She felt the city pressing closer now, the invisible lines between her life and the lives of others drawing tighter. She knew, without yet knowing how, that she was walking toward the same place Tyrell and Samantha were heading toward: June, toward Naomi and Jacob, toward whatever web had been spun long before any of them realized they were caught in it. And in the quiet after night settled in, each of them felt the same unease, that the true ending was not going to be about reunions or revelations alone, but about what would have to be risked, and possibly lost, to step beyond the place where their lives had been safe, small, and separate. They didn't know yet that the next choice each of them made would decide not only who stayed in their lives, but who would vanish from it forever. The final threads of the past were tightening, and soon, the whole picture messy, tangled, and unstoppable would come into view.